The preseason hype is at a fever pitch, let's say in Eugene, and it's spreading across the country when people are talking preseason national championship picks. Oregon is right in that conversation, but guys have to go to camp. They actually have to lift weights and run and work and do all those good things before we can think about that. We got Spencer McLaughlin on the line, Locked On Ducks, Locked On College Football on the Locked On Network. Spencer, what's going on today?
Well, Oregon doesn't have a commit yet, but, the day is young.
Exactly. Why don't we start there? My goodness. Number one wide receiver in the country, of course. He made his decision out of Texas. Then you've got Dorian Brew, one of the top cornerbacks in the country in recent days. Just all over the board, one of the best tight ends, one of the best running backs, two of those taken from Ohio State. When I say taken from Ohio State, basically those are the schools that it came down to, Ohio State and Oregon. And considering the conference realignment, that makes it even more intriguing. But this Oregon Dan Lanning recruiting surge is something else.
Yeah, he's on a heater right now and pulled in the best class in program history last cycle and is pushing, quite frankly, to beat that mark in this cycle. And when you look at, the high school classes that the national champions have traditionally stacked up leading into a national championship season, that's the trajectory that Oregon is on. I mean, they're recruiting at a level that we have not seen them recruit at before. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's, garnering so much well-deserved attention on the trail nationally is they are, doing things that they've kind of showed glimpses of, but now they're just pulling these kids and they're getting to Corian more, which surprised me a little bit. I knew Oregon had a shot. I still thought it was going to be Texas. It was seen as, a Texas lean, and he's from the state. And when he flipped from LSU, it was, he's going to Texas for Oregon to go in and get him out of Duncanville High School, which is a powerhouse over there. That's a wildly impressive pull. And I think this is just the standard that Lanning is setting on the trail, and along with his staff, that they are capable of going to get anybody from anywhere. They will recruit kids from Florida, from Texas, from California, from Maryland, from Detroit, from Ohio. I mean, Dorian Brew out of Ohio, Dallas Wilson out of Florida. They've got Cooper Perry out of Arizona, the number one receiver in the state. DeCorian Moore, number one receiver in the class out of Texas. The geographical reach of Oregon, I think, continues to be really impressive. They aren't just dominating a couple of states. I think their brand has really elevated to the point where every big-time national recruit, if Oregon is an offer, it's more than just an afterthought for a big-time program that they're going to consider.
So, Spencer, you know what the critics are saying, because you're probably hearing it 10 times more than I am. They're dropping bags, and that's all they're doing.
Well,
that's certainly a component of the game, and that's
100%,
absolutely
100%. Last time I checked, that's allowed. It's legal to offer NIL deals. Number one, number two. Let's not pretend like Oregon is the only school in the country that has a flush NIL collective. They have a good one. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat that. If you talk to anyone that covers recruiting, though, Mark, they will tell you that for the overwhelming majority of these kids, NIL is a factor. It is not the factor. I think the narrative that Oregon just drops back, they just pay kids a bunch of money, no one actually likes going up there for anything, is mostly coming from frustrated fans on the internet of other teams that wanted particular kids. That's typically where it comes from. You see the same sort of narrative take place when a kid flips from your school and all of a sudden it's, he wasn't that good anyway. Or he transfers out. Oh, no, he wasn't that special. He wasn't any good. Every guy that we have is great, and every guy that isn't a part of our program is just not any good and such. I think that is all pretty ridiculous for the most part, and I understand. As Colin Cowherd always says, fan is short for fanatic, and fanatics go crazy for their team and such. But I think that if you look at the players Oregon's getting, it can't just be NIL. Texas doesn't have a poor NIL collective. Ohio State is not sure. Ohio State this offseason was, getting or taking shots across the bow from, I think it was Matt Rule. saying, or I don't know, he had a different comment. But anyway, there was a report that Ohio State spent like 18 to 20 million in NIL on this year's roster. Well, I don't see the narrative that Ohio State is just paying a bunch of kids. And even if they are, I'm sorry, they've got a more committed fan and donor base than you do. Sounds like you got to up the game. I mean, it's the Moneyball line delivered by Brad Pitt. Adapt or die. And Oregon is certainly adapting into the modern college football recruiting landscape in a really effective way. So I think the other thing to note is Oregon's having all this recruiting success in the NIL era. If there was no NIL, no one has presented to me any single piece of evidence that they wouldn't also be succeeding at this level. Because Mario Cristobal, remember, had a 2021 recruiting class that was the highest ranked in Oregon history. It ranked 6th in the country. And NIL was not a thing in those days of, 2.5 years ago. It wasn't this major part. It wasn't all legal and whatnot. And to pretend like big time schools haven't been, giving kids money under the table for a long time is just silly and just complete and utter nonsense anyway. So if NIL were a factor, which it is, Oregon would be succeeding, and they are. And if it weren't a factor, they'd still be succeeding on the trail because this staff puts in the work. There's no talent base in the state of Oregon. They have to go outside, and they do it really, really well. And it's just a really, really good recruiting staff.
The national landscape of college football recruiting success has undergone little change. It's the same players at the top that it was pre-NIL. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State. Now, if you take Oregon, maybe they've elevated from top 8 to 12 or 15 status more into the top 5 on what appears that it's going to be a regular basis. But those fluctuations happen as schools become more committed, as they change coaches, and those coaches are better or worse. It's not like we've seen Louisville fly from 35 in the nation to number 2. We haven't seen anything like we saw with Ole Miss 10 or 12 years ago with Hugh Freeze at the controls. And then we found out, okay, there's a reason for this. No, the power structure of the recruiting process is pretty much what it's always been in recent college football.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point about the same teams are at the top in the NIL era. When NIL and the portal came out at the same time, everyone always kind of coupled them together. Oh, there are these big, massive changes. And the way I talked about it at the time is, NIL will make an impact, on a player or two. More than that. But it's a very, very small minority of players that are actually getting any significant amount of NIL dollars. It's not a huge figure. The more impactful element of college football that was changing, I said, was the transfer portal. And I think I have been proven incredibly right on that front, because the way that talent disperses and the way that players move, and now you can transfer an unlimited number of times, that is more impactful on the landscape of talent acquisition than is NIL. Because most of the time, I think with a lot of these kids, you're just seeing a public or more public, because, NIL collectives don't have to disclose, how much they're paying each and every kid. So we don't know all the figures all the time. But I think you're just seeing a more public version of what was already happening. Bryce Young went to Alabama before NIL was legal. Do you think he got $0 to go there? Do you think other schools offered him $0? I'm not even saying that bothers me, because it's just so well documented at this point that big time programs been paying kids for a long time. You think Zion Williamson got $0 to go to Duke? Like, no, it's a ridiculous assertion. So you can say that it has amplified and helped to widen the gap between the haves and have-nots. I'll agree with that sentiment. To say that it is driving, that it's the primary driver of the gap, no, I think it's just an accelerant on what the landscape already was, how it shook out, and Oregon is adapting to, be a team and be a program that people want to go and play for and know they can get those sorts of opportunities. And, I think the only program where NIL could be a revolutionary component, but again, the transfer portal is arguably still even bigger, is SMU. SMU has, I think, the first or second most valuable NIL collective in the country. And they have got some deep-pocketed donors who are still mad, rightfully so, about getting the death penalty long ago. and would like to return the Pony Express to its once and former glory. And they have paid their way to get into the ACC. They are raising oodles of dollars to fund the athletic department, keep coaches around, give kids NIL. They want to be great. They are, I think, the poster child of if you've got people that graduated from your university and want to be great at football, you can make that commitment. I think they're the most interesting team to watch in the ACC this year because of that change. Like, can you really just buy your way into success? We'll see.
It's a good point about SMU, and we don't want to make this an SMU video, but at the same time, you bring up a great point. And even this particular team that's going to hit the field this fall is very intriguing in the ACC race. They have better odds, according to Vegas, than the likes of North Carolina and Virginia Tech because of the skill positions. They're good. Maybe they're not ready for ACC play in the trenches, possibly, but they've bulked up there through the transfer portal. And certainly we've seen growing pains from the likes of TCU, Utah, although eventually good, eventually up to the challenge. But that transition was difficult for them. Transition very difficult for the Big 12 teams that entered last year. But SMU might be the outlier, as the first that's able to make that transition and hit the ground running, and maybe some kind of a dark horse for the college football playoff, as somebody here stated a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that and we'll wrap our SMU talk, get back to Oregon after this. I think that for the Mustangs, if their quarterback doesn't get hurt a year ago, that season might end differently. But I mean, winning the American Athletic Conference, that is not a small feat. I mean, that is, the first or second best Group of 5 conference in all of college football. I think SMU deserved to have the Group of 5 New Year's 6 spot against Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl far more than Liberty. I think that bore itself out. Now, would SMU have beaten Oregon? No. Would they have played it closer than 42-6? Probably. They would have been a touch better because I think the roster is higher caliber. And, they lost Brandon Hickman along the offensive line. So I too, and, he's an all-conference guy. Went to Oklahoma. And I'm curious to see how they hold up along those lines. But I think they have demonstrated a larger wholesale investment than any of the schools you mentioned. And UCF, by the way, made a bowl game last year. That's not bad. That's not a bad first year. And I think UCF this year is a wildly interesting team in the Big 12.
Yeah.
So going into the ACC, I don't think SMU is a contender, but I think they are kind of in that next tier of teams that, if everything goes right, maybe they do appear in the conference championship game. But they're probably, an 8-ish win team. Their win total is 7.5. But that's the only program that I can say definitively NIL has revolutionized their place in college football. There is no other program where their standing or their perception has dramatically changed because of NIL.
And to your earlier point, it spoke volumes when they want to enter the ACC and say, yeah, we'll do it. We'll flip the bill. We got it.
Zero media rights dollars. That's crazy. That's crazy because the media rights payout, I think on average over the course of the deal, is like $36 million per year per school. And they're like, yeah, we got it. We're good.
We just want to play big time college football.
We just want to
get there.